Welcome to The Explainer. Tonight, we are diving deep into President Trump's 2026 State of the Union address. Now, this wasn't just any speech. It was delivered at a really fraught moment. You had a slowing economy, the midterm elections were right around the corner, and, get this, a bombshell Supreme Court ruling had just dropped. So this speech became an absolutely critical test for his presidency. Let's break down exactly what happened and why it matters so much. All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll do a quick refresher on what the State of the Union even is. Then we'll get into that huge Supreme Court showdown that really set the stage. After that, we'll look at what Trump said, how the Democrats fired back, and then I'll ground it all in what the American people are actually thinking, and I'll wrap it all up with the big, unanswered question this whole thing leaves hanging in the air. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is the State of the Union, really? I mean, we see it on TV every year, but this primetime political show has a pretty wild history. And believe me, it has changed completely from where it started. So it all goes back to the Constitution, right? There's this little clause that says the president should report to Congress from time to time. That's it. It's so vague. And from that one little phrase, this massive political tradition has just ballooned into something the founders would probably barely even recognize. And you can see that transformation right here. For more than 100 years, it was just a letter. Thomas Jefferson thought speaking to Congress was too much like a king. Then Woodrow Wilson brought back the in-person speech, and once radio and TV got a hold of it, boom, it exploded into the primetime spectacle we know today. It became this incredibly powerful way for a president to just go right over Congress's head and talk directly to you, to the nation. Okay, now for the drama. Because the 2026 address, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. Nope. Just days, literally days, before Trump was set to speak, the Supreme Court dropped a legal bombshell that changed the entire game. We're talking about a direct, powerful challenge from the Supreme Court on one of the president's signature economic policies. It just created this incredible moment of high-stakes drama and a ton of uncertainty. So in this landmark 6-3 decision, the court basically said no to the administration's broad use of tariffs under its emergency powers. Now, this wasn't some minor setback. As the Foreign Affairs Forum put it, this ruling blunted the president's most improvisational economic weapon. It threw his entire economic agenda into question. So this just set the stage for a massive confrontation, right? Suddenly, the State of the Union wasn't just a routine speech anymore. It was turning into a direct response to the court, to his critics, and to a public that was getting pretty nervous. Everybody was watching to see how he would handle it. And President Trump, well, he came out swinging. This was not going to be a speech about finding common ground. Not at all. It was a defiant, full-throated defense of his administration and a direct attack on his opponents. He gets up there and he paints this picture of just historic success. He's touting what he calls the lowest inflation in nearly 5 years. He's declaring victory after a military strike on Iran's nuclear program. He's celebrating that border crossings are at their lowest levels in decades. And then he turns his fire directly on the Supreme Court, calling their decision on tariffs a total disgrace and promising to act right away. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. The disconnect. The president is up there declaring this huge economic victory, but polling from Pew Research right before the speech shows a totally different story. The White House is talking low inflation, but look at this. Nearly 3/4 of Americans felt the economy was just fair or poor. So right after the president finished, it was the Democratic Party's turn to offer their side of the story. And they chose two of their rising stars to deliver a message aimed squarely at the worries of everyday people. First up was Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, who was fresh off a big win in a tough state. She tapped right into those core economic anxieties, talking about rising costs and a real fear of what each day might bring. Then you had California Senator Alex Padilla, who slammed what he called the administration's failed economic agenda and their aggressive immigration tactics. So what you end up with are two fundamentally different visions for the country. The president focused on big themes like energy dominance, border security. The Democrats, they zeroed in on lowering costs for families, protecting healthcare, defending freedoms. The battle lines for the midterms were drawn right there in primetime. Okay, so we've heard from both sides. We have these two dueling visions from Washington. But after all the speeches, what do people out in the real world actually think? Let's dig into the data. Just look at this chart from Pew. I mean, wow. The partisan divide on the economy is absolutely massive. You see that nearly half of Republicans thought the economy was good or excellent. But look at the Democrats. Only 10%. 10. Overall, less than a third of Americans felt good about the economy, which really drives home that disconnect we were just talking about. Now, on immigration, things get a little more complicated. While a clear majority of Americans, 62%, are in favor of a strong military presence at the border, when you ask about specific tactics, the numbers flip. For example, almost three-quarters of the public say it is not okay for officers to check someone's immigration status based on how they look or the language they speak. And right in the middle of this incredibly fierce debate, here is a stunning number that adds so much context. According to federal data, migrant encounters at the border in 2025 actually fell to their lowest level since 1970. This one data point really complicates the easy narratives you hear from both sides. So you take the speech, the rebuttal, the polling data, and it all leads us to one final crucial question. What does all this really mean for a country that's already so divided? So where does that leave us? With the midterm elections heating up, the State of the Union definitely framed the arguments. It was a primetime show of power and persuasion. But you have to wonder, in an era where we're all so dug in, can an event like this actually change anyone's mind? Or does it just end up rallying the bases and hardening the battle lines for the fights that are still to come? That's the great unresolved question.